Demis Hassabis stated that one of his motivations for developing AI, he thought it was the ultimate tool, to be able to use it to answer some of the big questions about the universe.
The new economy in consumer products is help me protect myself from me.
When you have constraints, you're forced to be creative, and that leads down new avenues which are less conservative, and that might lead to radical discovery.
In the future, all jobs will be optional, right? In the future, you can work if you want to,
right,
but you won't have to.
Yeah.
All right, so
hey,
welcome everyone to episode 3 of the Frontiers podcast. I'm Steve, based here in New York, focused on healthcare and incentives. I'm joined in the flesh today by my co-host John.
Hey everyone. Hey, lovely to be here in New York. I'm really excited for this one, as I've been excited for the last 2 as well.
I think this is my favorite episode so far. We have John here in New York City. In the most beautiful week of the year, mind you. It's like early November, perfect fall weather, peak foliage in Central Park. We did a 10K through the park this morning, and the cosmic irony of it all is that John arrives in the global capital of capitalism right as we elected a socialist mayor, I think for the first time. So welcome to the belly of the beast, John. Hope you enjoy the bagels while they're still affordable.
I've loved the bagels. Steve has been kind enough to take me to all sorts of places throughout New York. What was the place we went to yesterday? Russ and
Daughters.
Oh, that was
classic Jewish deli.
Absolutely delicious. That was my first time actually tasting bagels in New York. Last time I was here. I don't know what I got up to. I think I had ramen.
Possibly have missed that? That's like the most
what was I doing eating ramen in New York?
Yeah.
Where I should have been having bagels instead. So this time I got a real New York experience. So it was great.
It's been great having you. And then John's headed to the airport directly after this podcast. So he's going to have a nice flight back.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I mean, to kick it off, like I think the first recent event, before we dive into Jason Crawford, and I do want to get to Jason Crawford this week because I especially love his coverage of what he sees as the good life. You and I have talked about this before, right?
Yeah.
But first, I want to go here in New York, since you're here, right? Mamdani. The billionaire exodus, the politics of resentment, right? So this guy, Democratic socialist from here in Queens, in Astoria, right, won the mayoral election in a landslide. He's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, explicitly anti-capitalist platform, and won decisively. So I think he won 71% among residents over 5 years. What's interesting is among native New Yorkers, they voted more towards Cuomo, who was the previous governor of New York. I think it's interesting because it's like if you reframe his win, it's almost like he won due to a coalition of transplants. But the movement towards socialism is something that I think we've seen across the rich world. There was a leaked email from Peter Thiel in 2020, which I thought so perfectly encapsulated this issue. His diagnosis is like, look, when 70% of millennials say they're pro-socialist, you can't just dismiss them as like stupid and brainwashed. Student debt went from 300 billion to 2 trillion now. Thiel's point is like, look, we should try to understand why millennials are gravitating towards socialism. And that's part of the paradox we're exploring today is like material conditions historically are good, yet politically there's like this radicalization, right? So I also love some people pointed out, no one hates billionaires as much as liberal millionaires. Alex Karp earlier this week said that the average Ivy League grad voting for this mayor is annoyed that their education is not that valuable and that the person who knows how to drill for oil has a more valuable profession. And I think that annoys the fuck out of these people. We're probably about to have a complete disaster, Karp says, and he was born in New York. I think what's interesting is the way you frame this, right? So New York is home to 130 billionaires, which is the most of any city, more even than London. We have 400,000 millionaires and 200,000 people who are worth over 30 million, ultra high net worth individuals. So we talked a little bit about this yesterday. The key premise is, will people leave more than you can tax these high net worth folks, which is a key part of the Mamdani platform, right? Norway, of course, tried this, and there's been a few other countries who have tried something similar, which is basically like, can you levy a wealth tax increase and actually raise funds? There's something called the Laffer curve, right? Norway's wealth tax increase was expected to raise like 150 million. It led to a 450 million net loss because 54 billion in wealth fled the country, right? And so your tax receipts actually went down, not up, right? So that is kind of the crux of this debate is, will ultra high net worth individuals actually leave? France did a similar experiment. So That is kind of the key of this debate. The counter argument here is that New York City benefits from stickiness. Almost like an internet platform would, right? Almost like a social network platform. You have this coordination problem. Unless all these high net worth folks decamp simultaneously, anyone who leaves is taking a major lifestyle loss. Everything here in New York is just set up for them, right? Sure. It's like people are sending their kids to school. There's not another New York, right? Yeah. Nowhere else captures the density of experiences and services, right? New York City benefits from this effect. And so I do kind of wonder, like, if everyone leaves, where are they going, right? The COVID one to Miami was mostly fake. And I think you're seeing a similar exodus in London. There was the guy from Revolut, right, who's going to Dubai.
There are some discussions, you're right, about with that. In recent times in London, since the election of the Labour government, there's been a lot of, like, discussions and also taxes that have been raised, and I think it's actually led to similar conversations and amongst the wealthy, and where should they go, should they stay in London or not. You are seeing an exodus. I don't know, I don't have official statistics, but I have seen in mainstream media interviews with people who have moved to Dubai, not necessarily of celebrities of that kind, but people who have a decent amount of wealth, and just sharing their thoughts on why they left London, partly due to taxes, but also due to what they perceive as like a decline in like the moral standards of the city, like and rising crime, not being able to feel safe walking down the streets. I think knife crime in particular has been quite rife in England and London, or it's something that draws a lot of attention anyway. And when you go to places like Dubai, and I was there last year, you just feel like alleviated. The mental strain of having to think about, like, am I safe to walk down the street at this time of day, just evaporates instantly. And I can see why there's quite a bit of draw towards that kind of life, even if you have to sacrifice some other sort of aspects of quality in your life. So definitely parallels between what we're seeing in London and New York now, or what might be happening in New York.
Interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think the network effects argument is compelling. I'm not sure if that's cope. I am very interested to see the future of New York. Obviously, we live here, so. The next recent event, do you want to take this one? I know you had something you wanted to share.
Something that popped up in my newsfeed this week was the release of a AI scientist developed by a non-profit organization called Future House, and they've been working on AI scientists for a while, I think, and most recently they spun out a for-profit organization or commercial organization called Edison, and their first product is called Cosmo, and essentially a research assistant that will support scientists to look through the library and wealth of research papers, information that is out there, collect that, synthesize that, and attempt to autonomously propose and run experiments. And they seem to have posted some initial results or places in which it's been somewhat effective. I haven't gone through all of them in detail, but they're of the kind of ilk which is reproducing past papers, but also identifying things like some mathematical rules, or one example that they shared on their website, which is edisonscientific.com, is one discovery that Cosmos made was using public available information about like genetic data to propose novel molecular mechanisms by which certain molecules reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. This is super interesting. I've not seen any other company which has produced an AI scientist with results like this. I'd be curious to dive into it. This sort of use case for AI has been talked about by many different leaders in the space as well. Demis Hassabis stated that one of his motivations for developing AI was to be able to he thought it was the ultimate tool, and be able to use it to answer some of the big questions about the universe. And Dario Amodei has written his thesis called Machines of Love and Grace, in which he describes some of the use cases for AI to support with molecular and biological scientific progress and discovery. He's personally motivated by this path because I think his father died of a certain disease, and he hoped like we had tools like this to accelerate the pace of scientific progress, discover new cures. Sam Altman talks about this a lot, about being motivated by using AI for science. So within the AI community, it feels like the application of AI for scientific progress is something that unifies a lot of people, and we'll see where this goes, but it's a real interesting start, obviously limited to the digital sphere, but perhaps when we have robots as well, that can assist in laboratories.
Conduct
maybe
experiments.
we can have full physical scale laboratories that are running multiple experiments in parallel. As someone who studied physics, like this is an initiative that caught my attention that I find incredibly interesting. So I'll be looking deeper into this over the coming days.
Yeah, no, would love to hear more about it. I think when you sent me the tweet, it was fascinating because basically they're saying, and I just want to quote from the tweet that Sam Rodriguez had put out. He said, users estimate Cosmos does 6 months of work in a single day.
Yeah.
One can read 1,500 papers and write 42,000 lines of code. At least 79% of its findings are reproducible, and it has made 7 discoveries so far, which they're releasing in collaboration with our academic beta testers. So this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's already making foundational scientific discoveries. My initial reaction to this is twofold. One is my mental model of scientific discovery and innovation has always been one that, like, foundational science happens within large institutions, usually universities, right? Like real R&D is they make discoveries and and then those are fine-tuned and they find applications in private industry or in military. So it starts in universities with academics and then it moves upstream. I think of like in the biotech space, right? That quickly goes to somewhere like a biotech company, small, medium-sized biotech company. They raise money to say, look, there's promising preclinical research done. We want to take this into the clinic and we want to develop it further. And then it gets bought out by one of the big pharma companies. And then obviously in other areas of technology, it's a similar thing. I guess my first thought is like, are we beginning to see the beginning of the end of the university as having a monopoly on foundational scientific research?
Yeah. I don't think so. Actually. And I hope we won't, because industry tends to drive or to pour money into a single line of research. So I think the debate, or what we're seeing now with AI, is that there's a lot of focus on large language models in the AI industry, and especially around the transformer model, which was published in 2017, and a lot of money has been put behind to develop infrastructure to make it run better and research on how to make it run more efficiently. But there's recently been a lot of great work in other types of language models and architectures, and a lot of that happens in universities because universities don't have the wealth and the infrastructure to run some of these large language models. And so they have certain constraints that are imposed upon them in which they need to operate, and that pushes. I think most of us are kind of intuitively aware of this, is that when you have constraints, you're forced to be creative, and that leads down new avenues which are less conservative or accepted, and that might lead to radical discovery. And I hope actually a tool like this could empower individual scientists at universities to do more with the resources that they have and really diversify the set of solutions that we're looking for towards a problem. So quite the opposite. I'm hoping that tools like Edison will actually help universities thrive and the academic environment to thrive.
That's interesting. It could almost be like a competitor to university research, right? My take is university research is invaluable, but at the same time, there's a lot of incentive issues within the structure. You have people chasing grants and people chasing tenure and people trying to get... There's not as much, for example, like replication research is done, right? And there's sometimes not as much rigor as you would hope. I think somewhere like AI is probably a little bit more replicable, but outside that, you know, I know in biology and medicine, we're getting to a point where pharma companies don't even trust the research that's been done by the universities. For a long time, they've had basically a monopoly. And if you look at medical research, there's an issue where the distribution of z-values, if you look at it, they're basically on two sides outside of either plus or minus one, which statistically can't be the case, right? You have to have done research that z-values are actually less than one. It's not statistically significant, but that's not what you see, right? And so the p-hacking, like all of these issues, I do wonder if you have what you're saying, which is like a nonprofit or like other organizations who are getting in on the action. And it's not just universities, but it's universities collaborating with tools like Cosmos. It's organizations like Cosmos themselves and Lone Rangers with tools like Edison's just doing it on their own. And that maybe this peer-reviewed journal system that we have becomes a little bit more bottoms up in addition to the tops down way that we have it done at universities. And maybe there's a more flourishing, thriving ecosystem that helps us like perpetuate human discovery.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. There are obviously first incentives that people follow at universities, I'm sure, but also in industry as well. Like, I think as someone who studies incentives, you probably recognize that incentives push people in all sorts of organizations, sometimes in the wrong direction. Like, for example, let's take a pharma company who's working on dementia or Alzheimer's drug discovery, a drug related to that, and they've been promoting a certain solution that they're working on. Like, they are less incentivized to explore new solutions that might undermine their efforts, potentially. And so they continue to promote. And there's been a lot of discussion, actually, is it with the amyloid beta? Or where is that coming from? Is that coming from academia? Is that coming from industry? But you can imagine also people in industry are also working hard to continue to create like a consistency bias and continue to drive forward what they're incentivized by. So having a healthy ecosystem where industry challenges academia challenges industry is probably good, where they can put the spotlight on these perverse incentives and say, hey, there's something fishy going on here. Let's kind of orient ourselves more towards a healthier goal.
I think that's great. I tend to think sunlight's the best disinfectant.
Right.
And I also think that, maybe it's a more colorful kaleidoscope of folks rather than just universities and industry. It's probably something like universities, industry, lone actors, rich guys who just cobble together some funding and
the gentleman scientist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what is his name?
John Carmack.
Nat Friedman?
Nat Friedman.
What Nat Friedman had done with the plastic list, I thought was incredible,
Yeah.
right? And he just, I think it was like $400,000 or something, but he put together a team of smart kids from, Stanford or whatever in the Bay Area, and they had gone around parts of San Francisco and done like these labs, and it was actually really hard for them to find labs. It was actually, there was a lot of practical impediments to them doing that research, which you wouldn't have thought at the beginning, but for them to simply evaluate, like, where were microplastics hiding in our food? It seems like a question that we should all be interested in.
Right.
For some reason, university is not providing a lot of answers there. Industry is not providing a lot of answers there. And Nat Friedman's just like, hey, I think this should be done. I'm going to do it. And then it's also the nonprofits and other things like that. So I just hope that there's more sunlight everywhere around those areas of discovery so that we prevent those 10-year, 10 billion plus losses that we had in the area of Alzheimer's research and those types of things. Having replication is so important.
Fascinating. I think the last point to say about AI is just, in general, I think what AI does is it distributes opportunity, and what this is doing as a tool is distributing the opportunity for more people to do science and level the playing field so that an individual, and also, as we talked about, researchers who are working in constrained environments might be able to continue on a path of research that matches the capabilities of larger institutions. And so I think that in itself is just generally the power of AI, giving us all tools to do more with what we have. I think this is a really cool application, and we'll see where it goes.
I do want to talk about the sulfur balloon kids, but I think we'll probably do that on the next episode.
The ambience of New York.
Yeah, exactly.
Shut it away.
Yeah, it's the sirens and the the gunshots. No, just kidding. All right, so the topic for this week, Jason Crawford, right, chapter 4 of his Techno-Humanist Manifesto, which is basically the good life, or the life well lived.
Yeah, so in part 3, he talked about the Ode to Man, which I guess was just honoring humanity and all the incredible inventions, achievements, and progress that we've made.
Yeah.
And in this part, he seems to be trying to answer the question of, like, what is the point of progress? And do we actually see, like, material benefits to individuals as a result of progress? And he starts to look at how do we define if people's lives are improving as a whole. And so he tackles some of the questions around, like, happiness. Like, is happiness the right measure? Or what is the right measure for progress? Is it happiness? Is it something else? And he goes on to introduce a couple of values that he thinks are important. I think one of the first places in which I would want to begin is to discuss, like, his definition of the good life, and maybe why happiness isn't really, according to him, isn't really the right measure, because the way in which he frames it is that happiness is kind of momentary, a bit subjective, and instead we should try to find core values which are consistent across many periods, and think about how those are progressing or how we're perceiving those to progress. And he actually shares a definition of the good life in 2 parts of the essay. He says that the good life is one of constantly discovering, pursuing, achieving, and maintaining values. And then secondly, he says, a good life is one of growth, of constant achievement, of upward motion, one that is dynamic and not static. And so we can start to unpack that. And I'll kind of toss it over to you to see what you think, because I know in past episodes, you've actually talked a little bit about what you think the good life is. You've shared this image of a family around the dinner table, somewhere in the Mediterranean, healthy food, a lot of emphasis on community and relationships, and maybe a kind of a slower pace of life, not dynamic as he's described here.
Yeah.
So when you were reading it, how did you reflect or interpret his interpretation of the good life?
Yeah. I think the first section to me, it's helpful framing, right? Like, we first have to get out of the way the idea that GDP and GDP per capita does not equal happiness. I think most people at some level are aware of this. I think there's like really stark examples when you look at, parts of Europe that have GDP per capita which is lower than Mississippi. No one reasonable who has been to both Mississippi and these parts of Europe, say, wealthier parts of Europe, France, Germany, etc., would reasonably think that life quality is anywhere near better in Mississippi, where a significant contingent of the population is on food stamps, and there's egg farms and antibiotics and industry that causes health issues in people, versus entire societies where people live noticeably longer, infant mortality is significantly lower, and people just live healthier, better lives. So I think it's right on him to dispel that first, right? GDP per capita does not equal happiness. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, if that doesn't equal happiness, then what does? And you're right, we have talked about this. When you say GDP per capita is not the right measure, the natural reaction, I think, for many people and in popular consciousness is to say, oh, well, we should be measuring the overall happiness of society. And at first glance, you might think, oh, yeah, of course we should. Like, don't we all want to be happy? Isn't that the ultimate, kind of purpose of life? But then, as you point out, there's a lot of issues with that. One is that certain cultures are more apt to say they are happy. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes it's because, something good just happened to them, or maybe you're happy this year, or you may be happy in this moment. I think the way they phrase the questions is how satisfied are you with your life? How good is life satisfaction? But then even that is tricky, right? Because I think, there's been some research done on Protestant versus Catholic countries, and North Europe versus South Europe, where Northern Europe is less likely to say they're satisfied with their lives, even if materially they live much more comfortable lives and they have a lot more values, as Crawford would put it. So I think that's interesting. Look, in terms of value fulfillment, I think Crawford, obviously being a former founder, there is the parable of the American investment banker and the fisherman in Mexico. The investment banker is on holiday with his family, and he says, "Oh, why are you fishing here?" He's like, "Yeah, I fish a little bit. Maybe if I catch something, I'll lay in the sun with my family. Maybe I'll surf. Maybe I'll, take a nap, and that's just kind of my life." And he's like, "Well, why do you do that? You should buy more boats and start a fishing company, and then you could sell the fishing company, and you could be rich." And the fisherman's confused. He's like, "Why would I want to do that?" He's like, "Oh, because then you could, chill with your family and be a fisherman." He's like, "Yeah, that's what I'm already doing," right? So there's this parable. I think Crawford would say the fisherman is pursuing values, just different ones. I think the point probably isn't constant striving. It's having the freedom to pursue what you value. So for him, it's like this, constant discovery and onwards and upwards. And I think that speaks very much to his ethos as a type A, former founder, very, forward-thinking technologist, product of Silicon Valley. And that's great. And I love that perpetual self-actualization. But that's probably not for everyone. I think many people, maybe even most people, want a quiet, stable life. I think the image of the family around the Mediterranean in good health and having good relationships, it kind of harkens back images I have in my head to idealized times of people in southern England, right? When J.R. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings, he called it the Shire because it was supposed to be based on shires and Oxfordshire and parts of England where he saw just it's very much this merry England stereotype, but lovely people living simple, pastoral, mostly agrarian-based lives with no natural enemies, shall we call it like that. And if you could, within those people's existing setup, reduce infant mortality, increase lifespan, reduce toil, reduce chronic disease, if you could do all those things, I don't know if you need to do that much more. Should they have the freedom to be striving and discovering and type A overachievers? Absolutely, they should have the freedom to do that. And I think it's great. But I don't think that's a one-size-fits-all template for the good life.
Actually, your point there is something that I was thinking about when I was reflecting on what is the definition of the good life to me. What does it mean to me? I think I boiled it down to actually freedom and the ability to have autonomy and make a choice about how you would live your life. And I think that's what most humans are probably pursuing at some point. The reason we work, it could be because of fulfillment or a desire to pursue our passions. For many people, work might be a passion, but also for many others, it is not necessarily a passion. It's a way to collect resources to be able to do the other things in their life, whether it's take their family on holiday or to just put food on the table. And ultimately, I think most people are striving for some kind of freedom, and progress affords that freedom.
Yeah, I thought the ultimate pill, actually, in his essays, which is really fascinating, is this idea that, like, for most of human history, you didn't really get that much of a choice, or any choice at all with regards to what job you did, who you married, where you live. I think for many people, you could complain and say, oh, I don't really like the options that are available to me, but at least you have options. I think it's a big reality check, and maybe we'll get to that in the next segment, but like the goalposts, the proverbial goalpost has moved quite a bit in terms of the expectation inflation for most folks. If people realize that, you know, as he points out, laundry day was literally an entire day, right? I mean, women in early Tsarist Russia were working in the fields right up until birth, and then back to household chores right after they gave birth. I mean, it was a brutal life, and we've talked about that in episodes past, right? And just in the past 100 years, most of us in the rich world have remarkable amounts of choices in every domain of life.
Yeah, that's interesting, because if you read part 1, he talks a lot about how progress is not for the sake of leisure and comfort. Yet when we look at some of the examples that he gives, and one that you sort of shared there, and he speaks about, he shares many others as well, it seems to be all of those examples are actually related to leisure and comfort rather than like fulfillment. And he kind of ties the end of part 2 back to this, which is essentially like, whilst technology has afforded us the options to pursue a life of fulfillment and do all of these things, which in his definition are kind of like a dynamic life, many people don't choose to do that, and it boils down to personal choice at the end of the day. But progress does afford us that choice. But maybe where we can go from here, like, now we thought about what the good life is, we can talk about how Jason Crawford breaks down the good life. He mentions that as a techno-optimist, he very much believes that progress helps us achieve meaning in life. And then he goes on to sort of describe, well, where do we derive meaning from? And those come from 4 key areas that he pulls out, or value areas. He talks about work, love, knowledge, and beauty, which was an interesting one, to be honest. It's not one that I would have thought of, or actually many of those, apart from work, are not ones that I would have initially, well, work and love, work and family, initially have thought about. Why don't we just talk about some of these and how he thinks about them, and some of the examples that he shares to point towards how progress has been made in each and one of these areas and how that has led to an ability to find more meaning in life. Share your thoughts on, first, some of those core value areas that he picked out, and maybe if you have any specific examples that stood out to you as you were reading part 4.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting about this is the work component, right? Work is, as he points out, how we spend a third or more of our waking hours. It's how we experience our own efficacy, our own usefulness. It's the one thing that we do to create independence, and it's a major contributor to people's self-esteem, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world. It's how you define yourself. You go to a party, people ask you, what do you do, right? You first meet someone, what do you do for work, right? So it's very much like fulfilling work. What we do day to day is supposed to be suited to our talents and skills. Now, as he points out, in the turn of the century, the vast majority of people did manual jobs, whether that was farming or whether that was blue-collar labor. Now, a lot of that has moved upstream to professional and managerial or white-collar roles. But now there's this new criticism, and here's the goalpost moving again. Are these jobs really engaging, right? So there's this long line of criticism that we feel estranged. There are these soul-sucking jobs that I feel disconnected from, and I'm doing this email job. The rise of the professional managerial class, as it was, right? And people are unhappy, again, because they're sitting in cubicles and sending emails, and they're detached from work that they feel like is meaningless. I think especially in the US, a lot of this stuff is performative. I don't know how much of it actually creates any kind of value. Some of it is almost reminiscent of the Soviet Union, right? It just seems to be like, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us, and are we really doing anything? And what I love about this is like, okay, once again, big reality check. If you feel that your soul would be better nourished by a job that takes you out into nature, guess what? You can still do that. You can be a ski instructor or a park ranger or a farm worker. as over 1% of the workforce still chooses to be, you can enjoy the outdoors with much less physical burden.
Yeah.
You can ride on a tractor instead of reaping and hoeing by hand. If your true calling is a craftsman, you can get an apprenticeship certificate. You can be an artisan in a pottery barn in Virginia or in a furniture gallery in my home state of Vermont. But I think after thinking it over, a lot of people would actually opt to sit in an air-conditioned office space behind plate glass and earn a living by typing and talking, right? So the moral and psychological benefit of work is this sense of independence, and the fact that we're able to not only do jobs that are comfortable, but are somewhat interesting and mentally engaging, even though maybe it doesn't fit the goalpost for a lot of what people have in mind, it's pretty good. Like it's better than it's ever been.
Are we just perpetual complainers? Like, will humans ever be satisfied with the status quo? There's a lot of truth in what he shares in that technology has, again, moved the world in such positive directions. You're right. He mentioned specifically about the transition from farm work or being stuck on the farm to having the option to move around to different countries, generally speaking, and to try a variety of professions throughout your life as well. But we're so many of us are dissatisfied. Like there's that book that came out, Bullshit Jobs, which just many people are tied into work that they don't want to do, and many of us feel stuck. And why do we feel unable to live that life that has been supposedly afforded to us by technology, and many of us feel stuck in this kind of soulless meaningless jobs?
You want, I mean, my mental model of this is like, we need to unpack what is a material crisis from what is a mimetic crisis. In other words, I think it goes back to choice, right? Like there was, I remember seeing an advertisement a long time ago for Millennium, it's a hedge fund. And there's this kid apparently who works for Millennium, and he's like a quant trader of some variety. This is during COVID, right? So he goes out with his parents to the woods of like Pennsylvania, and he has a farm, and he lives with his parents on the farm, and he's a farmer outside of normal trading hours. So during the hours of 6 a.m. until 4 or 5 p.m., he's like a quant trader, and he's presumably very smart and make lots of money. But then when his free time, he's a farmer, and he has a little farm, and he has chickens, and presumably this is fulfilling to him because he chooses to do that, right? If he were condemned to a work of farm life, probably he wouldn't be so happy. But because he is choosing to do this, now suddenly it's like really fashionable. There has been this big trend on TikTok with especially Generation Z of like the return to the farm people. You have these billionaire families. One was the ballerina farm case is the most notable example, but there's a lot of those where the trad wife aesthetic and the trad aesthetic has reemerged as being something that everyone wants. And it's like, well, hang on a second, like you can already do that. You can move to Des Moines and like have a farm. And like I've gone to high school with kids who like started their own farm, and they have a little farm shop, and they're at the farmers markets, and they live that kind of a life. I think what people actually want is they want to have the option to do this, but also to press the eject button if they decide it gets boring or they don't want to do it anymore. So it's you always have to couch the activity with the fact of like the optionality that is bundled together with the activity, right?
Right.
Do you want to live an agrarian life, or do you want to live an agrarian life with the option of exiting at any time? Do you want to live in your cubicle job, or do you want to live in your cubicle job with the option of being able to press the ejector button at any time? It goes to this like sense of control. Do people have a sense of control over their lives?
Yeah. And I think this ties into exactly what he's saying, that progress, again, just to keep repeating it, has afforded us the possibility to choose between these different ways of living. And, not just work, like he talks about love, the ability to find spouses and partners that we couldn't have done otherwise, thanks to dating apps, for example, which a lot of people abhor or dislike. They feel like, we should go back to more traditional ways of scouting and finding partners in the spaces that we live in. But, he shares personally that he found his wife through a dating app, and he shares also the example that in the past, or maybe recently, that a lot of homosexual individuals have found liberation through these applications by finding partners on them, and that's had a huge impact on them. But then also he talks about knowledge, like how we've been afforded platforms like Duolingo, Coursera, which gives us access to education, how we can now travel all over the world and soak in and embrace new cultures and information that we get from them. Beauty is an interesting one. He didn't actually really talk about, or I don't recall, maybe you can input in here about how we have the freedom to express beauty. But I guess thinking about it for myself, there's less stigma about how we dress. You know, we can be in all sorts of flamboyant colors. You talked yesterday about Elvis Presley and how he moved and how that is window. Maybe I guess it's kind of related to this. Like, that is a freedom of expression. Dance is a way of expressing beauty digitally. We have tools. Actually, I would love to talk about this as well. Like, tools like AI media generation affords more people the option to express their stories and beauty to the rest of the world. Like, there's obviously a lot of debate around whether that's good or not, because on the flip side, generates a lot of slop, and not many people have high taste for what is good. But the point being across like this whole part, that is, technology has offered us like options across a number of areas of life in which we derive a lot of meaning, and it's good. How do we go about actually living and choosing those and feeling comfortable in making those choices? Because he wraps this whole essay up with, like, whilst we have these choices, many of us still feel like we are not happier than the past. For example, divorce rates are up. He shares that example. Or marriages are shorter. Many people are not reading as many books as they once did. So how has progress also, whilst offering us, giving us more options, also taken away some of that perceived sense of optionality? And ultimately, how do we educate people in order to make better choices, in order to fulfill or take advantage of those options that are now afforded to us?
I think this gets at, and I think we talked about this in the last conversation too, right? Is Tyler Cowen famously put it that modernity is a bundle, and you get the bundle, and some of it's good stuff, and some of it's not so good stuff, right? So, do you have an incredible amount of choices when you go to the grocery store? 40,000 different products, and all of these different, cornucopia of food and just brightly colored muffins and cupcakes and cookies and 20 different types of milk and grass-fed milk and 2% and whole milk. And we're inundated with choice. But most of that is not good for us. The vast majority of the new choices that have been created for things that we could put in our body, not great, right? Not great. Maybe in the produce section, now I can get berries year round. They bring them in from Chile in this month, and they bring them in from other parts of Latin America in this month, and then they're grown here locally during the summer. That part is great, right? The fact that I can enjoy a banana basically any time of the year, when European nobles treated bananas as something that was exotic from kind of the faraway lands. That part is incredible. I think there's going to be some hiccups, right? So when you reference the divorce rates, the decline of reading, I would argue the rise of chronic disease, and like the fact that we're malnourishing ourselves in terms of or over-nourishing ourselves, depending on who you ask, right? But consuming too many calories, and the calories we do consume are not good for us, right? Why is that? Is it because we maybe have too much choice? I think it's maybe that agency has to catch up a little bit. It sort of goes to Steve, like, he had this beautiful quote by Steven Pinker, which is from his book Enlightenment Now, where he says, like, this supernova of knowledge continuously redefines what it means to be human. Our understanding of who we are, where we came from, how the world works, and what matters in life depends on partaking in this ever-expanding store of knowledge. And this goes right at the root of perhaps the choices we've been given are outpacing a little bit the knowledge with which we should confront these choices, right? So on the one hand, like, you go back to this example of food, we're given all of these choices with food, and you've seen it here in New York City firsthand. Not exactly the most healthy thing, but I think now our knowledge is beginning to catch up. The new economy, especially in consumer products, is help me protect myself from me, right? What I want in the long term is not what I want in the short term. Ozempic is help me be less hungry for things which are not good for me. Help me make better choices for myself. Apps like Minimalist Phone and all of these distraction-free apps that are trying to protect us from the algorithms of Instagram, those are things that people have developed agency for and said, look, I've scrolled TikTok and Instagram for hours at a time, and I don't feel so good after that. And now I want an app that's going to protect me from me. And I want to focus on reading books more, or like achieving fulfillment more. So I think, are there hiccups where, okay, suddenly you have increases in the divorce rate? Sure, but I think there's also the reactions to that. And when we react to those negative things that come out of the bundle of modernity, we do it in a way which is more informed and more mature. And the society just becomes overall more aware of that, and we develop a sense of propriety around these new technologies.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. One thing that I was thinking about a lot when reading this, and maybe it ties into a little bit of what you were just saying now, is many of the examples that he shared about exemplifying progress, usually over like 100, 150 year time period. Like he makes a lot of references back to the late 1800s or the early 1900s, and then compares that to now. And that's a huge window. And I do wonder how beneficial progress has been, say, in the last 20 to 30 years relative to maybe the last 50 or 60 years. Why is that interesting? I guess it maybe answers this question, like, is progress generally always good? And also maybe to point a spotlight on that, like, can we learn anything about the type of progress that we've made over the last 20 to 30 years and where we should point our efforts in the future, given what we've learned over these last few decades?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that you picked up on as well.
Yeah, I did see that. It's low-hanging fruit, right? It's easy to talk about, okay, in the 1870s, life was X, and now life is Y, so therefore technology and capitalism is great. It's like, well, hang on a second, right? Because if instead of 1870, we looked at 1970, specifically, I think it's 1973, right? There's the website of like, what the fuck happened in 1973? And so there's all these different charts that suddenly come completely decoupled from each other, right? 1972, the gold standard gets abolished, right? Richard Nixon famously closes the last gold window. But all of these things changes, and perhaps one of the most important changes from that time was the decoupling of real wages with productivity growth. So productivity growth has ballooned and real wages have been more or less stagnant over the past 50 some odd years. And I find it curious that he points out that the average American household at the start of the 20th century devoted a majority of its expenditure to food, clothing, and housing, right? Just to get subsistence. Now we're far below that. Okay, sure. But how has it fared since the 70s? And I think this gets into this big debate that everyone is having now. And there was a great piece in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago about, millennials are not doing nearly as well as their grandparents did. And a lot of young people today don't feel like they are able to achieve the same milestones that their parents did in terms of home ownership, in terms of marriage, in terms of having children. And if you look at Mark Andreessen's favorite chart, is like the inflation in different types of goods and how like consumer electronics and software has completely deflated and gone to zero in terms of price. And you have things like housing and education and healthcare, which have just ballooned in price astronomically. And one could argue that maybe the housing crisis is actually more of a mimetic crisis where people are not complaining about housing prices in aggregate, but rather housing prices in desirable areas. And so they're rather saying, okay, my peer group is here in New York City. I don't just want to buy a house in Des Moines, Iowa. I want to buy a house here in New York City because that's where I live. There was a great chart showing the average age of first-time homebuyers has now surged to over 40 years old. And in the 80s, it was under 30.
Wow.
And that's just first-time homebuyers. I think for homebuyers, generally, the average age is well up in the 50s and 60s. Wow. And that's here in the U.S. You have a similar housing crisis in the U.K. It's happening all over the English-speaking world and a little bit in continental Europe. And it makes you wonder, is Jason Crawford missing a little bit? So there's some debate to be had there, but I just think that generally I'm sympathetic, and maybe it's my position as a millennial. I am somewhat sympathetic to the argument that we have it a lot harder. And the numbers don't lie. Fertility is in the toilets. I mean, we're just not having children. And when we do, we're having them later. And how are we going to pay for everything? I'm 31, right? So there's probably 4 million people in the United States who are my age. So there's 4 million people in my retirement cohort. How much room is there for us to have a comfortable retirement? Some of it's zero sum, sadly. Right, I do wonder how much of the saving am I doing to have a normal, comfortable retirement versus how much am I doing to afford labor, which by the time I retire will be very scarce the world over, right? Because demographics are inverted everywhere. Who is going to serve me the coffee, right? Who is going to bring me the food? When I'm 70, 80, 90 years old, who is going to be at my bedside? So this is the thing, right? Is can you get technology to invert the kind of Baumol's cost disease, or however you want to call it, like this inversion of capital and labor, NIMBYism, et cetera, and regulatory capture and all these other things. We found ourselves stuck in a place where people don't feel as happy. And I think that's kind of what's missing from some of this, is that's not really addressed. So I think that's a really salient observation. You're totally right about that. Well,
The
I'm
numbers are not lying.
seeing it in
Yeah.
the data, right? I mean,
Yeah.
look at where fertility rates are.
Yeah.
I'm sure maybe they felt that way 3 generations ago,
Yeah.
but they still had kids.
Yeah.
And they still bought houses. And today they're not having kids, they're not buying houses. Right? So, I mean, it's more than just a feeling. It's like it's showing up in the data. And it's inverting our demographic structure, which is having disastrous consequences for all of our pension funds.
You know, it has me thinking actually, like, as you mentioned all of these things, what is the logical conclusion to like all of progress? Like, what is the peak of progress? Is there ever a peak of progress? Like, if we think about what is he imagining is like a utopia, because there will always be a moment in time where humans in some way feel constrained and they're not able to live a life that is completely free and autonomous. So it's like, now I can't go to Mars, so I want to go to Mars. You know? I do wonder, what does he imagine, and what do you imagine like he thinks is the peak of like all of this progress?
There's no peak.
Just a continual ramp up to the stairway to heaven.
Yes, we keep going. I mean, he gives some evocative imagery at the cover to his techno-humanist manifesto. I think, look, I mean, material progress is great. I think it's always going to be a 2-step forward, 1 step back type of thing. Do we achieve a state where none of us have to farm, or almost none of us have to farm? Very few of us have to work in factories, and we all get to do white collar work. But you're sitting on your ass for 8 hours a day or more, right? Yeah, and then suddenly you have cortisol spikes, and your Teams and Slack is pinging, and you're sitting, and it's really bad for you, and it's as bad as smoking, maybe like the lack of. And so then we invent like maybe a technological solution to that. Oh well, now there's Ozempic, so you're going to eat less. So you're going to, cancer rates will go down. All these chronic illnesses will start trending downward. Like that's great, right? So you have this new bundle of modernity. Some things are good, some things are bad. The bad things, we actually have to have the next bundle of modernity, some of which is addressing the previous set of problems. And I think every successive step, it gets objectively better. Do you have problems today? Yeah, sure. Can people not afford houses? Sure. Can people not have kids? Sure. But it sure is better than, women giving birth to half of their children are just not expected to make it to adulthood. It's way better than like, oh, I'm going to die of the bubonic plague because I don't have like antibiotics, right? Like, I think whatever problems that the next generation confronts us with, it's certainly better to have those problems than the previous set.
Yeah. Hopefully.
You would hope, right? You would hope. Maybe the next generation of bioweapons will make me eat my words, but...
Let's hope climate change doesn't really...
Exactly.
tear us to the ground. Yeah, okay. So I think the last point that he ends on, and we can talk a little bit more about this if it's interesting, is about this idea of education, or how do we enlighten more people? How do we make them more aware that they have more choices? And also it boils down to that. Like, there are constraints still in today's world on the kind of things that you can do. For sure, like just thinking about migration and mobility, I cannot easily move to the United States, and someone in a different country, cannot even perhaps move within their own country. So there are constraints on choice, but for the most part, the range of possibilities has expanded thanks to overall increase in wealth globally. So where do we go from here? How do we make more people perhaps aware of the choices available to them? Going beyond just awareness, feel empowered to sort of act, to take advantage of those choices.
I would almost invert the question on its head, right? Is how do we provide templates for people who are overwhelmed by the choice? And Crawford is showing his libertarian individualism very clearly here, because he's saying the be-all, end-all of this bundle of modernity that we have is that we have incredible amounts of choice, that we have incredible amounts of control over what we want to do. And for you and I and other technologists and other optimists and other type A go-getters, overachievers, whatever, choice is great. Of course I want choice, because I'm high agency, I'm high efficacy, I love being able to walk into the supermarket with 40,000 options and say, I'm going to invent my life. I'm going to live here. I'm going to work in this industry. Some days I'll cycle to work, and some days I'll do a workout like this, and some days I'll fly to London, and some days I'll fly to SF, and I've just invented my life in such a way, and I've taken full advantage of all the choices that modernity has given me, and that's great. But I'm also self-aware enough to realize that not everyone's wired like me. Emil Durkheim basically said that at the turn of the century, there was no choice, right? You were just going to do what your father did for work, and you were going to shut up because that was survival, right? And you were going to have kids, and you were going to get married to your next door neighbor, and that was kind of the end of it. And for my grandfather, that's exactly how it was. He married the girl next door. He emigrated to America. He worked his ass off in the factories and at night as a mechanic, and he built a life, and he bought real estate, and he had kids, and there's not a lot of choice in that, right? And I think with the rise of capitalism and all of this technology and material abundance has given this vacuum for a lot of folks who don't really know where they fit, and they can't really find it and navigate it on their own. And so he talks about this sense of purposelessness and anomie and anomic suicide. Not everyone is wired that way, where they need that choice. So you also have to have pre-cut out templates for folks that can gently nudge them along a path where they can get an apprenticeship. And I think to a system like Switzerland or Germany, where you gently funnel the masses of people towards something that's related to an apprenticeship. Electrician, plumber, mechanic, those are good jobs. They're good for your self-esteem. They pay well. And if you have the right setup, you can afford a family and you can have a good life and you can have 2 holidays a year and you can be healthy on those jobs and have a good retirement on those jobs. And those jobs aren't getting automated either, right? I think, should you have a path for all of the type A overachievers and, that top 10, 20% of people who really want all that choice? Sure, and it's great. But that's probably not most people.
Yeah. It has me thinking back to, I know you have a disdain for UBI, but should many people in the world have the choice of not working? And even if we choose not to work, healthcare and all these other benefits are abundant and ubiquitous and cheap, that humans can live without that, without toiling.
Yeah, I think, so Mark Andreessen talks about that, right? It's like, for a lot of people, I think, what is it, Marx wrote something like, if people were freed from toil, then they would be poets in the afternoon, and they would be painters in the evening, and they would play the violin at night. And I think for some people, that's probably true. For a lot of people, it's probably going to be more closer to the Cheetos and meth scenario, which I think is probably bad. It serves to reason that if you look at the long arc of human progress, that at some point you do reach a point where things flip and become abundant. We already have certain goods which are post-abundant, right? We have information which is abundant and not scarce at all. It used to be libraries were our answer to how do we deal with scarcity in the world of information. Now information's abundant. The marginal cost to reproduce information is 0, right? And the marginal cost to reproduce arts and literature and media is 0, right? So those things are now post-scarcity. What happens when in the world of atoms we achieve post-scarcity in terms of housing, in terms of healthcare? Then the entire field of economics changes, because economics is an entire study on how we deal with scarcity. But if there's no more scarcity and we live in abundance, the whole thing becomes blown wide open. I don't know what will happen. I do think people should have a calling. I think probably Max Weber wasn't wrong when he said something like, a person finds his beruf, his calling, which keeps him from sin and keeps him from vice and, all of these other things that idle hands are probably not good for most of us, right? I do think people should be busy with something, right? There should be a sense of mastery. There should be a sense of giving back, of purpose. People need purpose in life. So I would just leave it at that. I don't know. I don't know what world awaits us in a world where everything is abundant. And if things even are distributed for everyone to have, even if we are in a land of abundance, it might be abundance for a few living on Elysium. And the rest of us here on Earth don't have it.
That's a lovely point to maybe end this chapter of Roots of Progress.
I think next week we'll talk about Crawford's chapters on solutionism, less philosophy, more practice, which I love the sounds of. And what do we actually build the future we want? How specific technological policy and cultural interventions.
I can't wait actually to read and reflect on what he proposes, some of the areas of progress that we should be orienting our attention towards. So yes, excited for the next one. Last week we took the idea of sharing something that we would like to see in the world. And I think it's a good idea to continue that tradition.
Why does this not exist yet?
Why does this not exist yet? That's the question that we're asking ourselves. So something that's been on my mind quite recently has been basically the accessibility of a sort of a health check for the mind. I haven't come across anything which is affordable or feels as commonplace as a blood test. That can really give us an insight into the state of my mind and the health of my mind. And I've been thinking about this more recently, because reading into things like Alzheimer's, dementia, grandma has recently suffered from that. And there's a lot of discussion in the research community about how if we could detect signs of dementia and a deteriorating brain sooner, we'd be able to put measures in place to stave off some of the negative impacts from that disease. So I'd love at some point soon in the future for us to have more ways to inspect our mind non-invasively, hopefully. That is as commonplace as the blood test, and I think that would be a wonderful thing for us as humans.
That's interesting. I know, Prenuvo is working to democratize the MRI, right? Which I think one of their products actually is just a head scan for your MRI, right? So you pay, I don't know, what is it, $500 or $1,000. You do a full scan of your head, look through your brain. Is everything healthy? Is there plaque buildup and this sort of thing? But could you do a similar thing with the mind where you are seeing if your brain is still sharp, right? If I look at my Whoop heads-up display, it's telling me my strain, my sleep quality, my recovery as proxied by my heart rate variability, HRV, and my resting heart rate. But should it also have a fourth circle, which is my mental health, right? Which is how good is your cognition today? Your memory, your attention, your processing capabilities, which change day to day. And I would say maybe a fourth bucket would be your self-control, right? Because when you're sleep deprived, you tend to fall prey easier to temptation. You want to have sweets and fried foods and all those things, and we give into those temptations much easier when we're sleep deprived. So I would love to see a longitudinal, week to week, day to day, how good is my cognitive capacity? And it could be as simple as like a 4 or 5 minute game on your phone, which is testing your memory. Could be at the beginning of the week, I say, okay, John, I'm going to give you these 3 words, boat, cucumber, wire, and I want you to remember those exactly 3 random words next week, and just test your memory and see if it stays sharp. And I do think it's not something that necessarily has to get worse over time. You can improve it. The brain is a muscle like anything else, and you can work on it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So, again, if anyone is aware of that, aware of something that exists, or is working on that sort of thing, please reach out. We'd be super interested in that.
A device or an app, anything in that space.
So many ways to tackle this problem.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
All right, Steve, what about you?
So mine is pretty simple. I just want something that connects me to my music where I don't have to go through my phone. I want a low-touch interface. I'd love to have a vinyl record player here at home, but I also want to be able to leave my house without my phone and go for a run and just listen to music. And I'm not the only person that wants that. I love listening to soundscapes, lo-fi. I have all these playlists that help me absolutely lock in at work and do 3-4 hours of uninterrupted deep work. I'd love to be able to leave my phone in my backpack when I'm at work, right, and just focus on work. But I can't get into that flow state without my music. So I just want to have something that connects my Spotify playlist on a simple device with a simple low-tech interface. Maybe just a screen like you would have on a calculator. It seems like a simple enough ask, but somehow that doesn't exist.
So Steve wants an iPod.
Yeah, an iPod that connects to Spotify though, right?
An iPod that connects to Spotify. Right. So what are we going to do about that?
Yeah. If anyone's looking at that, one of my friends is an electrical engineer by training. See if we can start something there. So anyone who wants to sign up to a waiting list on that would definitely help us. Anyone who would benefit from such a device, please let me know your thoughts.
Okay. This is the progress that we want, folks. So let's wrap it up there.
It was great to have you here in New York. I think like this is a monumental achievement for the Frontiers podcast because it's our first in-person episode. You're here in New York. Perhaps next time I'm in London. Or maybe we're both somewhere else, San Francisco.
The dynamic was good.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we have a guest, right? I'd love to get into the debate on future episodes about the automation of investment banking and consulting jobs. That's something I have a lot of thoughts about, and that's something I'd love to just kind of flesh out more. You and I have mutual friends who are working in that space, so I'd love to have some guests on at some point, and we kick it around. So do give us a shout.
Right.
We wish you a safe flight back, John. Thank you very much for coming to New York, man. It's been great.